Yes, thanks. I think three issues. The first one you mentioned is that using the sensitive rats, that is 100% right. The criticism of this thing is then just, you should take that into consideration of the numbers. So it's the point about the variability. To get rid of your background variability, you need much larger populations. I think the one point that Jacques made, I also agree 100% with. The one thing that we should not do is to see these things and then just, like the exercise you had yesterday as well, that you have to write the, what do you call the thing, what do we have to write? The press release. Sorry. The press release. You shouldn't get one of these things and then emotionally react and say, because I was actually thinking about this while Peter was discussing it. You can come and say, oh, another idiot published something or whatever. But in the background, I think one should obviously investigate it. I think the small advantage, we can discuss how nice it is, but the advantage of this is, it keeps people alert. It adds to the body of evidence in the end of the day. But I think as individuals, what we should do as regulators or researchers, we should look at these things, but not just write them off immediately. Obviously, a lot of work has been done on this, and it gives people ideas. In the end of the day, these things will have to be repeated and shown to be true, like the work in the European Union is being done now. And then there was one other point I wanted to make, which I can't remember, so I will give it to you first.
This is the emo and then
oh.
It's short. I'm talking from a regulatory perspective in terms of scientific uncertainty. One of the reasons that causes this for a regulator is the fact that scientists normally don't agree on publications of this nature. Whether the paper it's having a positive outcome regards the particular or safety study or not, is the inconclusiveness of scientists amongst themselves regards whichever paper is published. And it causes confusion for a regulator, because as much as you have presented this, when you go and look for papers on safety studies that has concluded that the particular GM did not cause any of the effects that was studied on, is that the other scientists also does similar criticisms. And I would have loved to see you doing at least one paper that says the study was had a positive conclusion, and one that says it had found this and this, but these were the problems in both studies. That for me creates some kind of objectivity in the thing, because the problems of the nature that you have just presented are coming from both sides.
We all agree that taking DNA from one species to, or rather maybe from a plant to an animal, is not defined as crossing the species barrier. We agree on that. But what I struggle to explain, especially if I'm asked, is what would be the circumstance when that species barrier is crossed? Like, maybe give an example where there will be maybe a break or a species barrier crossing. If you understand what I mean. So what would be if you say that taking DNA from a plant to an animal is not, you wouldn't define that as crossing the species barrier? What would then be an example of when that actually happens?
I don't know if I exactly understand your question, but if you take, I don't understand, so I'm going to try and answer if I don't just dive in. But definitely, if you take a piece of DNA from a bacteria and you're putting it in a plant cell, it's crossing the species barrier. So I definitely don't say genetic modification does not change the species barrier. That is, in effect, the advantage of gene. that you can now go and look at the genetic trait from any organism. And if it's at this stage, a single gene trait, it's fairly easy to transfer it. It's when it comes to the complicated things. It's only in crossing where you need two gametes to combine to form a new embryo and the embryo to develop. That can't. I mean, there are obviously many examples where it does happen to closely related species. I had the zebra and a donkey. A horse and a donkey can also, to give you a mule. So there's lots of, but usually those kind of things are terminal, is that the right word? Because a mule can't reproduce by itself, those kind of things. Because there's lots of reasons, but you must remember, when you have that single cell embryo, certain genes start to express, to induce the differentiation and the development of the embryo. So if you have two completely different gametes from different species getting together, those signals are completely messed up, so it will never fertilize. Even the ways in which the sperm, for example, will enter the egg cell, all those kind of things are very specific. This is why it doesn't happen across barriers. So you definitely do cross the species barrier, and I mean this is also then, especially from an ethical point of view, the criticism of many people. From a molecular perspective, to me, DNA is DNA. So personally, this is how I interpret it. But I know other people, I mean, we had this discussion. He said there's people that don't eat pork. So in their minds, it's a pork gene. Oh, pig, I keep on saying. It doesn't eat pork, but it's a pig gene. The pig gene in the plant cell is the issue for it. And again, coming back to all our discussions through the week, that should be considered. And this is why I think there's no developer out there that would consider doing that at this stage, because they recognize the sensitivities.
Henny, on your slides there, perhaps you also need to indicate that you can get a whole plant out of a single cell, but you cannot get a whole human being or a whole donkey out of a single cell. That's also a nice fundamental difference.
Yes, if you do cloning, of course, you can do it. But it's different. So if you want me to quickly explain that,
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is one.
Yeah, I meant it in
If we wanted to talk about cloning, we can. If anybody, it's not gene
No,
directly, but
cloning. I was
cloning,
saying
yeah.
something different, so
Okay.
that's okay.
but you can actually take an animal somatic cell. Dolly was made from the reason why she was called
Yeah.
Dolly
Mhm.
is because she was made from a
Yes, yes.
mammary
Skin cell.
skin. That was
No,
mammary cell.
but not every single animal cell gives rise to. You can't clone dolly from any other cell. You have to be specific about the cells, or else ants the whole thing. Or am I?
The origin of the cell is not important, but the point, this is why I said animal. A cell, just quickly,
Yeah,
a
no.
plant cell, anyone can differentiate. They are totipotent in general. Animal cell, you can get it from different tissues, but you have to put it, then the nucleus, within an embryo. So you denucleate the embryo because all of the protein components are
understand.
fixed.
I understand. The reason why I put the totipotence on the table was it had an animation. And yeah. That,
Okay, so I see I already have only 2 minutes left, and I
Yeah.
thought we were going to be fast. So quickly, you said the only thing that I'm concerned about your statement is, of course, everything you say is true within the interpretation of things. But remember that truth, whatever that is, does not lie somewhere in a balance between negative and positive. So comparing things does not necessarily, I mean, you must, as a regulator, know of all these things and you must evaluate them individually. And then you must decide which one is the right scientific information at that stage. And this is why these things are controversial. But your statement also reminded me of what I wanted to say after Sharp's comments, is that from one of the fallouts of this whole Serenity thing again is what I said, is this bitter fight between the two opposing camps. The scientists, yeah. Yeah, but you see, this is the problem, what I say. It should not confuse you as a regulator. This will happen. I mean, I don't think consensus is the truth. This is the point. And as long as we have something that's controversial, we will never have consensus. There are again, and we can go into this complicated thing about frames of reference, but you can sometimes take exactly the same information and package it differently. Because somebody that's pro-GM can take that data from Cerevini and say it's not. But this is why I said on a previous occasion that for regulators, you must really understand the stuff that at to a certain level, or you must get people to assist you that you really trust with those kind of things. Because it's complicated, yeah, that's the problem, you see. Nobody trusts anybody else except themselves. So, quickly, the point I want to make is that then from that, one of these fallouts, and I haven't finished that sentence again, but you will also, if you go to the literature now, you will see that there's papers being published on this standoff between the groups. And the people that publish these type of papers are actually a fairly small group in the world as well. But they feel definitely, I mean, some of the aspects, what's the woman's name? I keep on forgetting. No, not one of those. The one that always publishes with the people from Genoc and Jack Hanneman.
Yeah.
Sorry? I saw her at COP Mock, but
Yes.
in any case, I've got the name now. But she wrote a paper, she was the first author of a paper that looked at this. Hilbeck, yeah, Angelica Hilbeck. And if you go and look at the arguments in there, I mean, some of those things I have really a lot of sympathy for. But how they interpret it is that the people that published that genes are safe, they feel that they are really under siege, that there's this big international kind of organized efforts to push down the things again. And one of the things, and I think people like Peter and Sharp is maybe better suited to do this thing, but it's to look at, I think, the issues behind that. In my interpretation, one of the things is that the scientists that have molecular backgrounds and are in general they publish the same things, they've done that a million times. And in our frame of reference, when you transfer that gene that makes this protein, it just doesn't make sense that it can have an impact, and then you do the assessment afterwards. So I think sometimes the reaction is overboard, but they also come from and this is definitely nothing to do with commercialization or companies or whatever. Those arguments really irritate me, because what this slide also wants to show you is that it's definitely not only company researchers that do this kind of research. There's tons of other. And I mean, this is completely underrepresented because we support it much more than this in South Africa. In any case, there's lots of other things around the world, and one of the things that I actually like is sometimes not understanding the very complicated science behind and the statistics actually. This is the part that really freaks me out sometimes. I'm not a biased statistician. But if you go and look at this type of information, these are all the bodies that have said, it's safe. And I think this is also one of the reasons. You see, there's a huge number of people behind this.
Sorry, is it a specific GM that is safe, or is
It's the ones that are commercialized at the moment. So primarily, it would be the maize, soy, and cotton with insect and herbicide tolerance, but you can also think like things that papaya from Hawaii that's virus resistant, and there's a few other things. And of course, all the GMOs that's in the medicines and whatever. So, the reason why I like these kind of things for my own personal kind of use is, there's large numbers of very elite scientists around this. And this is the point I always try to make to people, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of them all of the time. So, this is just a different way of presenting the data to say, all of these bodies have made intensive investigations and the general conclusions of the things that went through the safety assessment. Again, this is an important distinction. We don't talk about the safety of GMOs. We're talking about the commercialized ones that's already gone through the assessment. And then, this is also just a quick thing. I mean, we don't really have to discuss this issue much, but it's one of the things that comes up where, Greenpeace has been a very ardent opposer of the golden rice issue from the start. They had huge campaigns about that. And they said, we should test the safety. And then a group of Chinese researchers went and said they're going to do now feed this, like in a clinical trial almost, to children in China. And of course, the first thing that came out, this is not the paper about it, this is where it's discussed. But then China came out and said, you know, it's unethical to test things on children, no. The end of this is actually, this is a place where people that you would consider more positive about the technology, they also lost all their careers and their jobs because they started doing this work. And then, of course, I think the thing behind this is that the Chinese government lost a little bit of face, obviously, because there was lots of issues about, you know, did they get the right ethical clearance and all those kind of things. So there are issues around that, obviously. But ethical clearance and things like GMO medicines and those are obviously always in place. And this is then a place, if you start, say, really doing trials, like a clinical trial on humans, you know, then you're really in the domain of medicine regulation and medicine ethics and those kind of things, which we have, of course, tons of experience with, so it could be done. And then just quickly something on business. It's the last point I quickly want to make. I'm already 4 minutes over time, sorry. I see. And we discussed some of this earlier in the meeting, and this is more some of the socio-economic issues that, of course, not really social, but economic issues. But there is a big push around the world, and it's not a push, it's people change of heart. I mean, this is obviously completely different in a European country than it is in an African country. It's different in South Africa than it's in Namibia, those kind of things. But depending on where you live, your wealth, and all those kind of things, what you are used to, you know, the way that you live, what do you call that? Your own ethical values of things, worldview, those things change. So there is definitely in the world, and I don't know what we call it, maybe Peter or Sharp can help with those things, but we're in an age where the rich countries, the rich people of the world move towards going smaller again. We had this whole thing about globalization, everybody loved technology and everything. But now we're coming to, and you see these things like locally produced by local farmers, organic. People try, because everybody were on the farm, this is my simplified interpretation, we were on the farm, we saw where our food came from, or at least we got it from somebody that was close to us. Now we live in a world where people just go to a shop and get it and cellophane wrap it. And people, this is one of the ways in which urbanized people feel that they take responsibility for the environment, for example, going back. So in that context, we now also come with a big new technology, and especially in food. Like Shark said many, many times, food is different in Europe than anything else. And it's that emotional thing. So, and part of that is things like huge companies. People do not like these big companies. So people are never anti-GMO just because they're anti-GMO. This fits into their broader worldview of all these other things. They don't like the big companies, they don't necessarily like a lot of technology and all those kind of things. So we should appreciate that, I think, but we should also distinguish between that worldview and how it's